Welcome to the keynote address of Villanova University's Sustainability Conference. This conference is the culmination of Villanova's Year of Sustainability, which began in September with the 80th anniversary of the Mendel Medal celebration. The Mendel Medal recognizes Gregor Mendel's lasting impact on scientific discovery and exploration, and outstanding scientists, scholars, and theologians who have bridged religion and science in their lives and in their work. Villanova's exploration of sustainability began last evening with a student-led discussion on community activism in the face of global climate change. And this afternoon, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. met with students from various programs on campus, including Peace and Justice, the Environmental Leadership Learning Community, Environmental Studies, as well as the Villanova Law School, to continue that discussion about community activism. Before we begin this evening, let me make just a few announcements. First, please be sure to turn off all of your cell phones and electronic devices. Thank you. And second, please hold your questions and photographs for the question and answer period that will close the evening. You will note in your program that earlier today, scientists, scholars, activists, philosophers, and educators addressed the multiple dimensions of sustainability in a series of panels and poster sessions. Tomorrow, those important conversations continue, as well as on Saturday, and I invite you all to attend those sessions, as well as to join us for two hikes, one to Chanticleer Gardens tomorrow, and Saturday to the Wissahickon watershed. Finally, I want to take a moment to thank Father Peter Donahue, the university president, for his commitment to sustainability. And I want to thank Father Cale Ellis for his tremendous support for environmental education, for this year of sustainability, and for this conference and its keynote address. Father Ellis.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good evening, everyone, and certainly a very warm welcome to Villanova University. It is a great honor to welcome Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the keynote speaker for this International Sustainability Conference from the local to the global. By way of background for this conference, my colleague Paul Rozier alluded to this, but I'm going to repeat it anyway since we didn't coordinate our talks. Villanova this past year inaugurated the Year of Mendel to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the Mendel Medal, which honors Gregor Mendel, the Augustinian abbot of the monastery in Brunn, in what is now the Czech Republic. And of course, Mendel discovered the laws of heredity which bear his name. And the Year of Mendel was marked by symposia, a major exhibit on Mendel at the Academy of Natural Sciences here in Philadelphia, and other lectures, as well as featuring well-known scientists and scholars. So this conference, which on sustainability, was envisioned as the culmination of that celebration. And we are pleased that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a staunch defender of the environment, is part of it. When Villanova University's Board of Trustees established the Mendel Medal 80 years ago, it stipulated that, quote, it was awarded to outstanding scientists who have done much by their painstaking work as scientists to advance the cause of science, and by their lives and their standing before the world as scientists have demonstrated that between true science and true religion there is no intrinsic conflict. Recipients of the award, again as mentioned, have included outstanding medical researchers, Nobel laureates who have been pioneers in physics, astrophysics, and chemistry, environmentalists, and noted scientists, theologians. Indeed, the criteria established for the award can certainly be applied to the work of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose life, standing before the world, and religious commitment have been dedicated to safeguarding the environment. You will note Robert Kennedy's impressive biography in the program which you were given this evening. You see his undergraduate degree from Harvard, his law degree from the University of Virginia, that he has studied at the London School of Economics. You also see that he is president of the Waterkeeper Alliance, a coalition of more than 100 environmental groups working to protect waterways in North America. And he's also a clinical professor, supervising attorney at the Environmental Litigation Clinic at Pace University School of Law. He is also a national spokesman for the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization that claims to have one client and one client only, the Earth. Moreover, he is an author of the New York Times bestseller Crimes Against Nature, as well as other books such as The River Keepers, Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr., a biography, and his American Heroes books on Joshua Chamberlain and the American Civil War, and more recently, Robert Small's The Boat Thief, as well as several other articles. There is one important book, however, that is missing from the list that is in your program. His book for children entitled St. Francis of Assisi, A Life of Joy, which is published in 2005. In an interview that same year in the Boston Globe, he said that he wrote this book because he wanted to show his kids, quote, positive role models that stress what's important about life. That we're not just materialistic beings, we're not just biological beings, we are spiritual beings as well. And he went on to say, it's tough living with one foot in the spiritual world and another foot in the material world. And the saints were people who showed us how to do that. When asked why he wrote specifically about St. Francis, he said, Francis of Assisi is my hero because he understood the connection between spirituality and the environment. He understood the way that God communicates to us most forcefully is through the fishes and the birds and the trees, and that it is a sin to destroy those things. But, he went on to say, what we are fighting for is not just the fishes and the birds. We protect nature not for nature's sake, but for our own sake, because it's the infrastructure of our communities. St. Francis's love for animals and wildlife, devotion to social justice, and ability to see the connection between spirituality and the environment resonated with Robert Kennedy Jr. He said it continues to motivate his work. And so may his work and the spirituality of his hero, St. Francis, continue to motivate us as well. So please join me in welcoming Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Thank you, Father Ellis. And excuse my voice, which will get better as I talk. And I spent a really wonderful session this afternoon with a bunch of the students talking about water, about activism, and about the history of the Waterkeeper movement. I want to recognize that we have a Delaware Bay Keeper, or Delaware River Keeper in this watershed. Maya Von Rossen I know she wanted to make it tonight, but couldn't. And I love what Father Ellis said about Mendel, Gregor Mendel. A week ago, I was at a Midwestern college, and the director of the environment there was from some kind of, I don't know, she was from some kind of right-wing think tank. And she said to me, she wanted me to address, I forgot what it was, but she was saying, and to show that Gregor Mendel was wrong about everything he said. And I was like, what? And it woke me up. But this is part of the kind of the right-wing think tank theology, because it was a paper that was published a few years ago that showed that commodity prices had dropped as population increased. And so that commodities for things like gold and oil, etc., had dropped. There was a famous bet between an environmentalist, I think it was Paul Hawkins, and you know who it was? I see it nodding your head. It was between an environmentalist and one of these right-wing guys, and they were betting that the price of commodities would increase over the next decade. But instead, they decreased. As population increased, the price of commodities came down. But the commodities that they used as benchmarks were things like gold and oil, and they were economic commodities. And the wisdom that the right wing took away from this was that the human ingenuity, excuse me, I drank 3 Cokes because I'm operating on a sleep deficit. That human ingenuity will overcome any of the deficits that result from population increase and the need for more resources. But if instead they had bet on the commodities of air, of arable land, of water, available water to the population, all of those things have dramatically decreased. The fisheries in the ocean, 75% of the fisheries are now in danger. And all of these commodities that really the life support system of our planet are at stake today, and they're all on the chopping block. And Mendel was right about those things, and it's clearly right, but it's still part of the theology that's keeping keeping this idea alive that we can just increase our population. We don't have to care what will happen because our kids will have the ingenuity to figure out a way out of the mess that we've created for them. And environmental injury is deficit spending ultimately. And as Father Ellis said, we're not protecting the environment for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it because we recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities. If we want to meet our obligation as a nation, as a civilization, as a generation, which is to provide our children with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, the commons, the commonwealth, or the public trust assets, those assets that are not susceptible to private ownership, but by their nature are the property of the whole community. And the public lands and the waterways that connect us to our past, to our history, that provide context to our communities, and that are the source ultimately of our values and our virtues and our character as a people. And the biggest challenge that we face, one of the students asked me, what's the biggest challenge? It's global warming and the political instability and the threat to civilization, and the threat to human life, the hundreds of millions of humans whose lives are already at stake because of desertification, because of flooding. Entire nations now in the Pacific are devising ways to abandon their countries already. We already have 250 million environmental refugees on the planet, and we could have 1 billion, depending on the rate of sea level rising. So this is the greatest challenge that we face. And the way that we use energy really is is the individual challenge that we face. We have to use energy. It's critical for our prosperity. It's critical for the survival of our communities. But how can we use it in a way that doesn't compromise the aspirations of our children and the aspirations of the rest of the world, the rest of humanity, to whom we also have a responsibility? And I'll just refer to a speech that was given by Lord David Putnam before Parliament in November, at a time when Parliament was debating a cap-and-trade system designed to avert the most catastrophic impacts of global warming. And Lord Putnam is one of the leading lights in Parliament today. He's one of the great visionary figures in England. He's also a great filmmaker who did Chariots of Fire and a number of other films. But, and to its credit, Parliament did pass this bill. But Lord Putnam was addressing the concerns of those individuals who, in England, virtually everybody accepts the science behind global warming. In our country, that's not true. All these polls show about half the American public still has doubts about the science behind global warming. And the reason for that is because propaganda works. We have been deluged by a $200 million propaganda campaign over the past 15 years, mainly paid for by Exxon Corporation, by Chevron Corporation, by the Ford Motor Company, and by many of the coal companies, Massey Coal, PP Coal, the carbon cronies, who have funded all of these slick PR firms like Burstyn Marcel and Hilton Knowlton, these phony think tanks on Capitol Hill, like the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute. There's about 100 of them now, and they're mainly funded by pollution money. And they stock them with the, and then they've got their corporate toadies on talk radio. And in these think tanks, they stock these think tanks with these phony scientists, these tobacco scientists, who, we call them biostitutes. And they will say anything, will say anything that industry pays them to say. That, the whales like being harpooned, and seatbelts are terrible for your safety, and, that cholesterol is good for you, or whatever. That, there's nothing wrong with tobacco, and that there's no such thing as global warming. And and the media then puts them on. These are not real scientists. They have credentials, but they don't publish in peer-reviewed publications. They don't show up at the conferences. They are not, people who are respected in the scientific community. But they'll put them on the TV against great scientists like Robert Watson. And the public has no way of distinguishing. They say, here's two scientists, one says yes, one says no. And, it's helped, the irresponsibility of a negligent and indolent press in our country has really helped foster, has helped let them get away with this propaganda campaign. The National Academy of Sciences did a study, an inventory of all the peer-reviewed publications about global warming that had been published between 1996 and 2006 around the world. And every one of them, without any exception, agreed on the fundamentals that global warming exists, human beings are causing it, it's already upon us, its impacts are going to be catastrophic. There were many disagreements about the nuances, but all of them agreed to those four precepts. At the same time, 60% of American news articles and electronic news reports about global warming raised doubts about the science. So there was this huge gap between public perception and real science. And what these guys from the Heritage Foundation do is they don't publish science. Science is hard work. You go, sit in the university and you pump out these tomes of maybe 500 pages, and very few journalists take the time to read them. But the guys in the Heritage Foundation, they cranked out these slick PR pronouncements on a single page of paper that can fit in a briefcase and be read. It's designed to be read in the 7-minute cab ride between Capitol Hill and Washington National Airport. And the journalist says, well, should I read this big thick thing or this little thing that seems like easy to read? And and that's why Americans still, they aren't sure about global warming. But anyway, in England, in other countries, they haven't been deluged by this propaganda campaign. And people accept the science. But still, there are people who say vested interest in others. We have to move incrementally, we have to move slowly, because if we move precipitously, it could cause dislocations in our economy with great consequences to our nation, to our quality of life. And Lord Putnam was addressing the concerns of that cohort. And he reminded Parliament that exactly 200 years before, the same body had debated the abolition of the slave trade. And at that time in England, virtually everybody regarded the slavery as an abomination, as a moral catastrophe for the British Empire. And everybody agreed that it had to be abolished. But the only question was, how fast? And at that time, there were people, again, vested interest in others, who said we have to move slowly and incrementally, because slavery represented 25% of the GNP of Great Britain. It was the principal source of energy for the entire British Empire, free human labor. And they said, if we abolish it outright, it will crater our economy. But after a year of debate, Parliament made the moral choice and abolished slavery overnight. And instead of collapsing, the British economy exploded, as thousands of entrepreneurs rushed into that space to create new forms of energy, mainly mechanical ones, in an era that we now know as the Industrial Revolution, which was the greatest epic in wealth creation in the history of mankind. And as it turned out, the abolition of the slave trade had exposed all of these hidden inefficiencies that were associated with free human bondage. Well, today, we don't need to abolish carbon to understand that our deadly addiction to it is the principal drag on American capitalism. We are borrowing $1 billion a day, mainly from nations that don't share our values, in order to buy $1 billion of oil a day from nations, again, largely that don't share our values. And this $700 billion export in American wealth has beggared a nation, $750 billion a year, has beggared a nation that, when I was a little boy, owned half the wealth on the face of the planet. We give every year in subsidies $1.3 trillion to the oil industry. And if you have doubts about that, look at Terry Tamanen's new book, Lives Per Gallon. Terry Tamanen just stepped down as head of California EPA, and he's done this wonderful book that meticulously inventories the vast subsidies that we give to the oil industry. Not just the direct tax subsidies and grants like the oil depletion allowance, but also the indirect subsidies like the $100 billion we spend every year protecting the oil lines in the Gulf. And he does not include the impacts of carbon from burning fuel on the people of the planet, which is one of the costs of oil, which really should be included in that figure. There's monumental cost. And he does not include the cost of the Iraq War, which the OMB just estimated is going to be $4.3 trillion over the next 20 years. The total cost of that war, which should, in all fairness, be billed to their account. Right? That's part of the cost of burning oil in our country that we wouldn't have if we were using some other form of energy. So these are the hidden costs, the externalized costs, or the incidental costs that you're not paying at your pump, but you're paying through your taxes, and you're paying through your healthcare system, and you're paying, through military costs. So that's $1.3 trillion a year. We give about almost $1 trillion a year in subsidies to the coal industry, and about $0.5 trillion to the nuke industry. And these huge, massive raft of subsidies to the incumbents form the principal impediment to much more efficient forms of energy and abundant forms and local forms of energy from entering in and competing in the marketplace. Now, what we do know is that every country that has decarbonized society has experienced instantaneous prosperity. Iceland in 1970 was the poorest country in Europe. It was 100% dependent on imported coal and oil. And the government of Iceland decided to decarbonize, mainly because it was concerned about global warming, which impacts the northern latitudes disproportionately. And again, there were people in Iceland who said we have to move incrementally or slowly, but the government of Iceland moved very determinedly and resolutely and decarbonized Iceland within 15 years. And so that Iceland was 100% energy independent. It got 90% of its energy from its electric grid from geothermal. And Iceland went, during that 15-year period, from being the poorest country in Europe to the 4th richest country by GDP on Earth. Now, Iceland has terrible economic problems, the worst catastrophic economic problems now, because it used its newfound wealth to buy the same bundle derivatives that we bought, but they leveraged them at 120 to 1, and now a third of the people in Iceland now want to leave because they all owe $337,000. And it's the worst economic catastrophe probably in human history, what's happened to Iceland. Well, Iceland's economy will return because the fundamentals are very strong. Iceland today is one of the larger energy exporters on Earth. It can't run lines across the Atlantic. So it imports bauxite from Jamaica and uses the huge surpluses of energy that it has from its geothermal to smelt the bauxite into aluminum, and then it sells the ingots on the world market. And that's its way of exporting energy. And Iceland, in 1970, no corporation on Earth would dream of relocating to Iceland. But even 6 months ago, corporations were lined up by the hundreds to relocate to Iceland to take advantage of its cheap, clean, abundant energy and the high quality of life that goes along with it. Sweden in 1996 decided to decarbonize its society and incidentally to shut down its nuclear power plants. It closed the 2 biggest nuclear plants in the country. It slapped $150 a ton tax on carbon. And Sweden today is the 6th richest country by GDP in the world. And you had the same thing happen. Thousands of entrepreneurs rushed into that space to create new forms of energy from wind, from tidal, from solar, from geothermal, from putrid garbage, from sawmill waste. I was in Sweden last week and speaking to all the officers of the Volvo Corporation, and Sweden, and they are adopting their entire fleet in Sweden to run on black liquor, which is biodiesel that's created from sawmill waste. Brazil decarbonized 18 years ago its transportation system, and as a result of that, Brazil, while the whole world economy is collapsing, is still enjoying the longest, most robust economic expansion in the history of Latin America. Costa Rica decarbonized its electric grid 15 years ago, and today, again, largely as a result of that decision, Costa Rica is by far the wealthiest country in Central America. You can go on and on with these examples, but we have much better geothermal in this country than they have in Iceland. My home at home is heated and powered by geothermal energy, and it's available to virtually any home in this country, and it's practically untapped. We have the best solar energy. We're in the top 3 on Earth for solar energy. The Scientific American just did a study that showed we have enough harnessable solar power in 19% of the most barren desert land in the desert Southwest, an area 85 miles by 85 miles, which is a fraction of the area that we're tearing up in the Appalachians to get at the coal, to power the entire energy grid in our country. We have the greatest wind resources in the world. North Dakota is the windiest place on Earth. We have enough wind in North Dakota, Montana, and Texas to provide 100% of the energy needs of our country, even if every American owned an electric car. And we have an administration now that is intent on doing this. And I had a breakfast meeting about 3 weeks ago with this really an extraordinary group of people, with Harry Reid, who runs the Senate, Nancy Pelosi, who runs Congress, Jeff Bigman is chair of the Environment in the Senate, Brian Dorman is chair of Appropriations, Stephen Chu, Secretary of Energy, Lisa Jackson from EPA, Ken Salazar from Interior, Carol Browner, who's the Energy Environment Czar, and as well as T. Boone Pickens, President Clinton, Vice President Gore, and the leaders of about 10 Fortune 20 companies, including Lee Scott from Walmart, the heads of the biggest utilities in our country, the biggest utility groups, trade associations in our country, and the head of FERC. And afterwards, we had about a 2.5-hour breakfast talking about how we redesign the electric grid in this country to accommodate all these new forms of power. And Afterwards, we went out and we did a panel. We sat on a panel and talked to a group of about 600 people to explain what the president's plan was to the American public. And they had 600 opinion leaders as well as hundreds of members of the press in that audience. And afterwards, there was a guy in the audience, Carl Pope, who's been running Sierra Club for 20 years at least. And he came up to me and he said, you know, the last time that I heard people talk like that was at the free speech zone at the Republican convention just before the police arrested us. But now, and this is true, but this is stuff that, you know, people were words that were only spoken by kind of hippies with tie-dye and smelling of patchouli. And today, it's the top, you know, people in our country who have embraced and adopted this, and this is the plan that the Obama administration has adopted for our country. They're funding it with the stimulus package. The energy bill, a lot of which provisions were announced today, is designed to do exactly this, which is to harness these forms of energy. Now, here are the impediments that the Obama administration faces. Number one, the huge subsidies to the carbon cronies, to the incumbents, particularly the carbon cronies. And we have to deal with those subsidies either through a carbon tax or through a cap and trade system. And that, the administration has settled on the cap and trade system as the most politically palatable way to dampen those subsidies, and the most targeted and the quickest way. There's a very political fight about that, but within the administration, that's basically what they've settled on. The other impediments are, number one, we don't have an electric grid that is capable of carrying this power. Our electric grid in this country is antiquated, it's already overpowered, and it simply cannot carry these new sources of power. And it can't do, the electric grid that we have today cannot effectively do or efficiently do long-haul transmission of electrons. So that a North Dakota wind farm owner who wants to sell his electricity in New Orleans or New York, the big markets, can't do it because the electrons would diffuse before they even cross the North Dakota border. So they just can't reach it. We can't do it. Now, the technology exists for doing long-haul transport of electrons, but we need to create that grid in our country today. The other problem is the grid is misaligned. It doesn't reach the big wind centers in North Dakota. It doesn't reach the Sun Belt in Arizona. So that North Dakota farmers, virtually every farmer in North Dakota, wants to put wind turbines on their property and generate income so they can save the family farms and regenerate the economy of these rural areas that are otherwise emptying and going bankrupt. And you've got huge sources of capital that want to capitalize those improvements. You know, they build the turbines. You have companies like the General Electric Company. You have T. Boone Pickens. You have Warren Buffett. We have a whole venture capital a community that is desperate to put wind farms on every farm in North Dakota. The problem is we can't do it because we don't have a grid that can carry that power. So the grid is misaligned. We need to realign it. We need a program like the highway program that we had back in the 1980s. It'll cost about $150 billion to build a smart grid in this country that will reach every American home and have the power to carry all these new sources of energy. This money is going to come from government, and it's going to come from the private utilities and public utilities who already are budgeted to spend about $2 trillion over the next 15 years. So, and what the government has to do in the energy bill is to make sure that to give a blueprint that gets those utilities to spend the money on the right things, the same way that we did with the highway bill back in the 1950s, where the Eisenhower administration made sure that there was money available and that local monies were spent building highways, but if you were going to build a highway in Mississippi, that it had to connect with the one in Alabama and Louisiana. So that, you know, and we need to do that in this country. The other problem is we have 50 different public utilities commissions, one in each state, 150 control areas, and they all have their own arcane and Byzantine set of rules that restrict access to the grid. So that it's very difficult for anybody to sell energy, for new sources of power to sell energy in the grid. T. Boone Pickens, who I spent 2 days with this month, he has to wait 2 years to hook up a wind power, one of his wind farms, to the grid. Even if he's right next to it, it takes him 2 years to get permission to hook in. So, and you know, we ought to be able in this country, if you have a solar panel on your roof and your home is producing more power during some part of the day than you're using, you ought to be able to sell that energy back to the grid and get market rates for it. There's no state where you can do that today. There's many states that will buy some of that energy back from you. None of them will buy all of it back from you. And none of them will give you market rates. And we need to change that. We need to create a marketplace, a national marketplace, that reaches every home and that does what a market is supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior, which is efficiency, and to punish bad behavior, which is inefficiency and waste. Right now, we have a marketplace that is governed by rules that are rigged to reward the least efficient, most wasteful, most dangerous, most poisonous, most destructive fuels from hell, instead of the cheap, clean, indigenous, and abundant fuels from heaven. And we need to change that relationship. We need to realign the rules that govern the marketplace so that they are aligned with our national interests and with the interests of humanity, so that utilities and individuals can make money by doing good things. And if we do that, and one of the things we've got to do is right now, the rules reward people who sell energy. So if you're a utility in this country and you want to make money, the way that you do that is by selling as much energy as possible. And so even if you're the most socially conscious person and you are the CEO of a utility and you want to do the right thing and adopt green power, your shareholders are telling you to get your customers to leave their lights on all night and leave the refrigerator door open, right? And so the good of our country is misaligned, is conflicting. They have to choose between their patriotism and their love of humanity and their duty to their shareholders. And that's an unfair position to put the CEO in. And what we need to do is what they've done in California, which is to realign the rules, rewrite the rules, so that they reward people who reward utilities that get their consumers to conserve. And it's a very easy thing to do. They've done it in California, and what happened in California? Today, in California, you don't make money by selling energy, but by showing that your consumers are the most efficient consumers in California. And what's happened because of that? Without any drop in quality of life in California, Californians now use half the energy that the rest of us use. Here in Pennsylvania, you use between 12 and 14,000 megawatts per individual, kilowatts per individual per year. In California, they use 6,000. And it's just because the utilities' incentives were realigned to reflect, to align them with the good of our country. And we should be doing that in every state. And if we do that, we create a national marketplace that turns every American into an energy entrepreneur and every home into a power plant. And we power this country on American entrepreneurship and initiative and energy rather than Saudi oil. Now, I'm on the board of the biggest green tech venture capital firm in our country. It's called BrightSource. And I just got off the phone with the CEO, and we've just signed contracts with the state of California to build a power plant that will provide 2.3 gigawatts of power a year to California. Of solar thermal. Now, solar thermal plant is not photovoltaics, it's a mirror farm in the desert. There's a scaffolding, a turbine, just like a turbine from a coal plant, that's suspended at the top of the scaffolding and surrounded by concentric rings of mirrors that are manipulated by computers to reflect light onto the sunlight onto that turbine. And 5 minutes after the sun rises in the morning, that turbine is 750 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a very, very effective technology. We're building this 2.3 gigawatts. It's bigger than any nuke plant in this country. It's bigger than any coal plant. But guess what? We're building it cheaper than you can build a nuke plant, and cheaper than you can build a coal plant. And once we build it, the energy is free forever. We don't have to go to Saudi Arabia and punch holes in the ground and bring up the oil and refine it expensively. and they're loaded on ships and have military escorts and bring it across the Atlantic and get in periodic wars over there to defend the oil lines, and then loaded onto trucks and the trucks spill it and pollute our waters and our air and burn it and pollute our kids and ship it across the country. All those costs disappear. The electrons are hitting the planet for free every day. All you have to do is pick them up and put them into the lines. Once you build the infrastructure, you never have to dig another hole in Appalachia. All of those other costs, you don't have to thicken the roads to 18 inches and do all these things to support the coal and ship the coal across the country and poison the lakes with mercury, etc. All that goes away. You just build it and the energy is free forever. Okay, if we were to build out all of the wind and solar, enough wind and solar to provide 100% of the energy needs, if we were to build out enough wind and solar to provide 100% of the energy needs, or let's say to decarbonize, to get rid of all the coal and all the other carbon sources to our electric grid, it would cost about $750 billion, okay? And so that's in addition to the $150 billion that we have to spend to build the grid, the smart grid. So for $750 billion, we can be off of coal and oil forever. Now, we spend $700 billion every year buying oil. The Obama administration has said we're going to stop importing oil by the end of his second term, which is 8 years. That's going to save us $700 billion a year. That's a familiar number, right? That's the number we gave the crooks on Wall Street to bail them out, from the crisis that they got us, the mess they got us into. And people are saying, well, they all forget that Bush was the one who signed it. And they say, oh, Obama's a socialist, and he's going to, destroy, he's going to indebt us for generations, and we'll never be able to pay this back. It will take us decades at least to pay the $700 billion. I'm forgetting, number one, the banks are supposed to pay it back, but number two, that even if they don't, and we have to pay it back, we just do it in 1 year. All we have to do is get off of foreign oil. And then we have $700 billion for free every year to stimulate our economy that we keep here in this country. And for a single investment of between $700 billion and $1 trillion, we can be off of oil forever, and we can have free energy in this country forever. Now, we've done this before in our country. We've done it with, for example, in 1979, we built an ARPANET in this country, an national internet grid that hooked every home to the internet and made a national market for the internet. In 1980, a year later, there were fewer than 500 PCs in this country, and IBM said it was a dead-end technology. Well, now most Americans have PCs, and guess what happened to the cost of information, of bits and bytes? It plummeted to almost zero. And that's exactly what will happen to electrons as soon as we build a national grid for electricity. In 1996, President Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act in this country, which made a national backbone, national spine for telecommunications. He essentially told all the baby bells, you have to open up your lines. Anybody who wants to get on them and sell a product, and the lowest cost producer is going to dominate in the marketplace. And that's what happened. And it worked. And that was 96, so that's like 13 years ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, I saw an ad on television from a telecommunications provider that will provide 100% of long distance and local call service for an entire year for $28. Well, I've paid in probably the last 6 months, at least one phone call, $28. So this is what the future is, because at the cost of telecommunications is plummeting to nothing, virtually zero. And that's exactly what will happen to electrons in this country if we build an electronic grid. And that's the biggest economic stimulus package that we can possibly have. Is much better than tax cuts. It's the cost of energy. A couple of years ago, I was driving a minivan and getting 22 miles, 24 miles a gallon, paying $2,800 a year my gasoline. Now I'm driving a Prius, and I pay $1,200 a year. So I have in my pocket $1,600 every year. Okay? Well, what if every American from energy savings, after building this grid, has $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,000 in their pocket every year? You remember when President Bush sent us a $300 check, everybody, and he said, this is a national economic stimulus package. And, well, and that was just 1 year. What if we all got that every year, just from energy savings? What would that do to stimulate the economy? And we, for every year. And we wouldn't have to gut the Social Security Trust Fund in order to do it. We'd just be and we wouldn't have to lower our quality of life. We're just living more intelligently. And that's right in front of us today. Last week, I went to to look at the National Grid Laboratory that they have in Denver, Colorado. And it's extraordinary the things that they have there, that they can do with the National Grid. They can go into people's homes. For example, we were talking about this at dinner, that most of the gas, the largest single burner of gas in this country today, natural gas, are peaker plants. These are plants that the utilities have to turn on to meet peak demand when base demand, the usual demand from burning their regular power plants, when that's exceeded, a couple of times a year it happens on really hot days when everybody turns on their air conditioning, and the peaks usually only last for 15 minutes. But if they don't have a supplemental source of power, it'll black out the entire grid. So they have to turn on these plants, sometimes days, even weeks in advance, in anticipation that a heat wave is coming and they may exceed base demand at a peak. Well, and you're burning gas in these very wasteful turbines because they're old and antiquated. And burning gas, for that reason, is like washing your dishes in V.O. Hennessy whiskey. It's extremely wasteful use of an extremely valuable commodity. And if we were able to save the gas that we burn in those peaker plants, and to eliminate the use of those peaker plants, we could save enough natural gas in this country to power our entire automobile fleet in America from North American natural gas. We have enough gas in this country, natural gas, to last 120 years. And of course, that would do a lot of good things for our country. Well, we can do that. And the National Grid, what it allows them to do is to go, it allows the utility to go to every consumer in its distribution base and say to the consumer, you're a homeowner, tell us the things in your house, the appliances in your house, that you don't mind us turning off for 15 minutes. Your hot water boiler. If somebody turns off your hot water boiler for 15 minutes, you'll never know it. Okay, it won't drop the heat of water in your home by even 1 degree. And or let's say your electric toothbrush recharge, your swimming pool recirculate. We all have hundreds of these fan chargers in our homes that are just sucking energy all day, and you don't need them. You don't care if they shut them off for 15 minutes. So now, when the utility hits peak, and there's a dozen companies that have made this software, and it's out there on the shelf. When the utility hits peak, instead of turning on that peaker plant 5 days, 10 days in advance, they send a signal through the line that turns off the hot water boilers in 1 million homes, and they never have to go to peak. And we save enough gas in this country to power our entire automobile fleet. The new grid can also go into your home and take energy out of your plug-in hybrid or your electric car and buy it from you. So that all of a sudden, as we move to electric cars, which we're all going to do, 10 years from now, that's where we're going. It's not going to be biofuels, it's not going to be fuel cells, it's going to be electric cars. Because it's so cheap, the economics are so compelling. And so the utility can go into your hybrid electric car. Let's say, you say to the utility, I will store energy for you in my car. And you can come into my home at night and take that energy out between 9 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. Just leave 20% of the battery in case one of my kids has to go to the hospital. And I have to make a run somewhere. So the utility then goes, and then the next day, when you're working, it's plugged in, between 9 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you can buy energy from it. The utility then goes and buys that energy from hundreds of thousands of automobiles, goes into your car, buys it from you for 40 cents a kilowatt, then 15 minutes later refills it and sells it back to you for 11 cents a kilowatt, and you make money on the transaction. The money is deducted from your bill, right? And it's a marketplace, so you can actually make money at the end of the month. And this again is available today. These are off-the-shelf technologies, and there's lots of people making these. I'll tell you just about one other company that I'm involved with. I said I was on the board of the biggest green tech venture capital firm in the country. It's called Vantage Point. It has, even in this marketplace, it has enormous returns, 53% returns. They have 35 portfolio companies that they've selected that they believe will be the Googles of the future in the new energy economy. One of those companies is a company called Better Place. And Better Place right now is rewiring Israel. We are at this moment installing electric plugs next to every parking place in Israel. At every gas station in Israel, we're building a structure called a swap station, where you pull in your car, a computer lifts you up on hoist, slides out your exhaust battery, slides in the new one, and you drive off with 120 miles on the charge. It takes less than a minute, less time than it takes to fill up your car at the pump. The utility, which is our partner, owns the battery, which is the most expensive part of the car. It costs $20,000 for the battery, but you don't have to buy it because it's owned by the Israeli electric utility. The cars themselves are being constructed right now by Renault and Nissan. There's 8 different models going from sports car to minivan, and they cost $10,000 a piece to manufacture. They go from, they're very good cars, they go from 0 to 60 in less than 5 seconds, which is as fast as anything you see on the road here. And they get, and they'll never break down because there's no moving parts. They last forever, except for the wheel and the axle. There's nothing in the car to break. So the car will last forever. It costs, I said, $10,000 to manufacture, but we are giving them away for free to every driver in Israel. And the reason that we're able to do that is because electric cars are so efficient compared to internal combustion engines. An internal combustion engine costs, an electric car in Israel costs, over the life of the car, 6 cents a mile to drive, including the gasoline and everything else. Including the power and everything else. An internal combustion engine costs 60 cents a mile in Israel to drive. In our country, it costs between 40 to 45 cents to drive an internal combustion engine because of the subsidized gasoline. But the delta between that 6 cents and the 60 cents allows us to give the car away for free the same way that your cell phone provider will give you a telephone for free and then make his money back by charging you a premium on your calls, depending on your contract, for 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years. That's what we do. We charge them a premium on the power that they buy for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. The reason internal combustion engines are so inefficient is because you've got to push a 500-pound power plant with you everywhere you go. So if you want to go buy a 10-pound bag of groceries, you've got to take your 500-pound power plant with you. And putting that in a car, you've got to fortify and make heavier everything else in the car. You know, the springs, the axles, everything has to be made heavier, and it makes the car far, far more inefficient. So it's actually less damaging in terms of carbon production to the environment in this country. If you are powering your electric car from the dirtiest, filthiest coal-burning power plant in America, you're still putting less carbon into the atmosphere than if you're driving an internal combustion engine. And you're spending a lot more money. So we're able to still give them, we're giving free cars, they still drive cheaper. And, Israel, which is our other joint venture partner, the government of Israel, when we complete construction of the infrastructure 3 years from now, they're going to slap a 78% tax on all new internal combustion engines. And then they're going to raise that every year till they're taxed out of existence, which is not going to take long because who's going to buy a car when we can get one for free? And a better one. And the Israel government, and also now the Israel utility has this big reservoir of storage. that it can use to store variable power. So it's building wind turbines and solar thermal plants in the Negev desert simultaneously. And then Israel said that, we're doing this because we get our oil from Egypt, they get it from Saudi Arabia, so it's a national security issue for them. Well, guess what? It's a national security issue for us as well. And we had in this country, we can do the same thing here in our country. We had in this country in 1941, Franklin Roosevelt gave his famous speech to America, where at the beginning of World War II, where he said, we're going to build 50,000 airplanes a month, 25,000 tanks, we're going to build a ship a day, and on and on and on. And people said, this is absurd. No industrial mobilization has ever occurred of anything of this scale or magnitude. But he went to Detroit, and he said to Detroit, you're not making automobiles anymore. You're making planes, and you're making tanks. And within 9 weeks, they retooled their plants. And within 6 months, we reached those goals. And within 12 months, we surpassed them. And that's because we had leadership in Washington who understood the urgency of this national security issue, was able to mobilize the technological, scientific, and entrepreneurial energies of our country, and able to inspire the American people to a new course of action that would preserve our freedom, our independence, and our values. And that's the kind of leadership that that we're all hoping that we can get of that magnitude today. So far so good. Let me talk about just about the cost of coals, because I said nobody's actually assessed, done an evaluation. And if anybody wants a really good research project, this is one that really needs to be done for somebody to assess the true cost of coal, the way Terry Tamminen has done with oil. But nobody's ever done this with coal. But let me talk about some of it, because I was in West Virginia 2 weeks ago arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court of the state. I was there for 6.5 weeks last year doing a jury trial where I won the biggest judgment in the history of the state, $500 million. And I've been fighting top mining in that state for many, many years. I argued the appeal last week in front of the Supreme Court. But on my way back, I flew over the Cumberland, and I saw something that if the American people... First of all, I drove on a road in West Virginia that I was told had 18 inches of asphalt on it, right? Now, the roads that you have out here have probably at most 4 inches of asphalt. And that asphalt is really expensive. Every inch costs millions of dollars per mile. So, we're paying for that asphalt. The American people, through the highway department, built that road, and they're paying for that 18 inches of asphalt. That 18 inches of asphalt is there for one reason, because the coal trucks are so heavy, they need a lot of asphalt. But they're not paying for it. You and I are. That's one of the hidden costs of coal. When they sell their coal, power for 11 cents a kilowatt, you're paying for that power through your highway funds. And I flew over the Cumberland on my way home. And, well, let me say this. I have 3 sons who have asthma. 1 out of every 4 black children in American cities now has asthma. 1 out of every 8 children born in this country have asthma. We have a pediatric asthma epidemic in America. And we know that asthma attacks are triggered by bad air, by ozone particulates, and the primary source of those materials in our atmosphere are 400 coal-burning power plants that are burning coal illegally. It's been illegal for 18 years. And a lot of them cleaned up. In Massachusetts, they all cleaned up. And many of them, what you find is in the blue states, they cleaned up. And in the red states, where corporations can easily dominate the state political landscape, they weren't required to. The agencies were captured by the corporations, and they didn't require them to comply with the federal laws. So 400 of them operating illegally, discharging this, according to EPA's own website, even through the Bush administration, the illegal discharges from those plants killed 60,000 Americans every year. 20 times the number of people who were killed in the World Trade Center attacks. But not just once, year after year after year after year. They cause 1 million asthma attacks a year, 1 million lost work days. That's one of the costs of coal. About 10 years ago, the federal EPA announced that in 19 states, it's now unsafe to eat any freshwater fish in the state because of mercury contamination. That includes this state, Pennsylvania. mercury is coming from those same coal-burning power plants. In 49 states, at least some of the fish are unsafe to eat from mercury. In fact, the only state where all the fish are still safe to eat is Dick Cheney's home state of Wyoming, where the Republican-controlled legislature has refused to appropriate the money to test the fish. In every other state, either some, most, or all the fish are unsafe to eat. In my state, New York, almost all the fish are unsafe to eat. I have a fishing license for $30 every year, and it comes with a book that gives the advisories on all the water bodies. And in my county, there's no place I can fish safely, and eat the fish. And we know a lot about mercury we didn't know a few years ago. We know, for example, that according to CDC, 1 out of every 6 American women now has so much mercury in her womb that her children are at risk for a grim inventory of diseases: autism, blindness, mental retardation, heart, liver, and kidney disease. The University of Texas just did a study that showed that people who live downwind of coal-burning power plants have dramatically higher autism rates, and at the schools downwind of those plants have special education rates that are much higher than schools that are upwind of those plants. And this is part of the cost of coal. I have so much mercury in my blood. I got my levels tested recently, and every woman of childbearing years should get her levels tested. But everybody should, because mercury is a really potent neurotoxin, brain poison. It's associated with early onset Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss, a lot of other bad stuff. You can get your levels tested by going to our website. Waterkeeper lines, send us a little lock of your hair. But there's more. There's better ways to get it tested incidentally than doing that. Because mercury, really, people who have a lot of mercury in their hair tend to be people who have mechanisms, biological mechanisms to expel mercury. And some of the people who have no mercury in their hair, it's because the mercury is stored in their bodies.